the problem, the real problem with universities is the university leaders who are cowards and have no backbone, largely failed academics. It used to be that the university leaders were interested in education and intellectual achievement and being and representing that. But now they're largely salesmen who try and raise money for um, for endowments and will go wherever the winds blow them. And in particular, what they try and do is get ahead of social media mobs. They're so afraid of social media critiques that they will gladly throw their faculty under a bus if it'll stop 5 or 6 activists from writing bad things about them.
Lawrence Krauss is an internationally renowned theoretical physicist. He's a best-selling author and an acclaimed lecturer. He has made significant contributions to physics and cosmology with over 300 papers, and he's the recipient of many international awards for his research and his writing. He's the chair of the Free Speech Union of Canada, and he's the president and host of the very successful Origins podcast. He's the author of over a dozen popular books on science, and his latest work is The War on Science. So, Lawrence, welcome to Amazing Academics.
Well, it's nice to be with you, at least virtually. I'll try and be amazing at the program.
Good, thank you. So, how did you get involved in this project, The War on Science? I've got the book. In fact, I got the American version of the book. It's got more essays in it than the English version.
Yeah.
But so I went and got it, and you could get it earlier as well from Amazon than you
Oh,
could.
and you're out, and that's good to know for British readers. You can get the American version. I didn't know you could. I didn't know
I
you
have
could.
to get it from Amazon.com rather than Amazon.uk. So it came
And they
over
mail
from
and
America.
mail it, and is the I hate to are the mailing fees as much as the cost of the book? But anyway,
Well, it wasn't too bad actually. It wasn't too bad.
good. Okay. Well,
Amazon are
anyway,
reasonable.
that's great
But
to
tell me,
know.
how did you get involved in the project War on Science, and how did you come about?
Well, it was like many of my books, it was a long and winding road. Um, I've started to get concerned about this issue in probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And as I saw more and more efforts to restrict free speech and the treatment of language as if it's violence, and it began to really hit my own field where I noticed it by 2020. And I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal called "The Ideological Corruption of Science." And um, and then what happened was that I received letters from various academics around the world, but in particular the United States. And it was interesting because they thanked me for writing it, some of them, and most of them. Um, but they all wrote under, well, first, none of them used their institutional addresses. They all used private addresses. But
Yeah.
5 of them specifically said they were writing under a pseudonym
Wow.
because they were afraid that their colleagues or their bosses would find out that they agreed with me. Now, this is just, I mean, this is like the Stasi or the
Yeah.
KGB. I mean, this is like the Soviet Union in the 60s. It just shocked me. I mean, the one place where you would think you would be free to express your opinion or even agree with someone would be academia. It should be the place where ideas are more open than anywhere else. And the fact that it was people were afraid, literally, to speak or agree.
And I noticed there's only one or two people who are not afraid, but they are the people who are so famous they don't have to worry about their position. Steven Pinker is in your book, and he writes a
Yeah,
fantastic essay towards the end, but he specifically says this applies to Harvard, and where he works. And I
yeah.
thought that
Well,
was
I mean,
courageous of him.
I don't think anyone's immune because faculty are afraid or they don't know about it. Most faculty, you have to understand, are not heavily involved in the culture wars. In fact, what they try and do is keep their head below the radar so they can just get on with their work. And they try to make sure that they don't ruffle any feathers and et cetera. And um, and so I think many of them aren't aware of how serious the problem is. But the bottom line is, until enough faculty begin to be aware of the problem and concerned about it, nothing's going to be done. And so I thought, how can I encourage that? And one of the ways I thought was trying to get a broad group of academics, all people within academia or have recently been in academia, not from outside. There are lots of good writers from outside, but then they're critiqued for being sort of outside, and I want to get people in the trenches,
Yeah.
and I wanted to get them from a wide variety of disciplines and also a wide variety of political persuasions, some that are known to be liberal, some that are known to be conservative, because I knew immediately this would be attacked as a conservative um, tirade, because unfortunately, and it's unfortunate to me that the that free speech has now become an issue on the conservative side. It used to be on the
Yeah.
more liberal side. So
Switch the
anyway,
maybe.
so I approached a lot of people about this because I thought if this broad enough group speaks out, maybe faculty, first of all, we'll see how endemic the problem is, how ubiquitous it is. And then they also will see that some people can speak out and they shouldn't be as afraid. And also for the public, who I think are largely ignorant about how seriously distorted and the situation is in academia and has been. That's important because the real problem with universities is the university leaders who are cowards and have no backbone, largely failed academics. And it used to be that the university leaders were interested in education and intellectual achievement and representing that. But now they're largely salesmen who try and raise money for for endowments and will go wherever the winds blow them. And in particular, what they try and do is get ahead of social media mobs. They're so afraid of social media critiques that they will gladly throw their faculty under a bus if it'll stop five or six activists from writing bad things about them. So, but the public can affect this because they could vote with their shoes. They can send their kids to the right to those schools or not. Many of them are publicly funded institutions, so the public can approach their legislators about this. So anyway, that was the decision to go from a personal book to a group book. But then it was very hard. It's like uh, you have amazing academics. Well, they're amazingly difficult to herd. It's worse than sheep. So
Yeah.
I was able happily to get this group, which I'm very happy with. And I will say that um, uh, there were people who I would have liked to have on this who felt that they couldn't contribute their name to this for the obvious reasons. So there are still, and some of them are very well known. But on the whole, I got a great response, and I was very happy with the distribution of people because they really are from not only just from the United States and Canada, but all over the world, but really from broad disciplines, from law and even classics, all the way to
Yeah.
physics and mathematics. And I also, since I believe in free speech, or at least academic freedom, I didn't tell them what to write about. I hoped, having done this on panels, I hoped it would work, that if I told each of them to write on a subject that was important to them, that I'd be able to put it together in a thematic way, and it worked perfectly. There are six different themes, and they vary from free speech to cancel culture to gender issues and so it really nicely covers things. There's some repetition, but I think it's good to see different perspectives, and there are definitely different political viewpoints as well. So anyway, the book came out, and I'm very happy that it did. It was, of course, immediately attacked, especially in the United States, as a right-wing screed. Um,
I was going to ask you, what kind of reception have you had?
well, it's been interesting. Um, in the UK, there's been a more, which I feel where I feel the culture wars are not yet as strong. I mean, there's still big issues, but there's
Yeah.
not the kind of polarization. There's polarization about many things in the UK, and free speech is a huge issue in the UK outside of academia,
Yeah.
especially. I
Yeah.
mean, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
But in any case, there was an immediate attack, as I expected there might be, and it's unfortunate because um, this these issues are not right wing. Oh, there's the other problem. The book was written and the final edit was done in November of 2024 before Donald Trump was elected. And after Donald Trump was elected, he started to do some things. I will say, I will admit, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but he did one or two good things regarding academia because it's already affected universities for over a decade, in some cases 2 decades, affected the hiring of people, many of whom become true believers in the fact in the unsubstantiated and untrue claim that universities are hotbeds of racism and sexism, and and these DI bureaucracies have also become ingrained. So it's going to be much harder to deal with this kind of thing. And students have come to feel that somehow that anything that offends them is somehow violence. And
Yeah.
that whole culture has to change if we're going to have, because the purpose of education, as I've often written, is to make us uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not pushing your boundaries. And
Which goes right against safe spaces and trigger warnings.
yeah, exactly. Spaces, trigger warnings, all sorts of things are going. Faculty are revising their curricula for fear of offending students. Um,
Yeah,
it's just
rather
terrible.
crazy.
It's a terrible situation. So in any case,
You
we
you
need to
got
fight it, and we need to fight it, unfortunately, from within and without. And that's why it was important to have the academics speak out. That's
well
a
you
long
you
answer to your first question.
you made a good start with these 39. I mean, 39 academics, and many of them are very famous academics. You've got Jordan Peterson in there and many other ones
Richard
too.
Dawkins, Anthony Baker, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I've been able to interview half a dozen of them as well because to get their own stories. But which of the stories did you find made you the most angry out of all the things that you've heard about?
Being in the trenches for a while and writing about this, almost nothing surprises me. But I think that, well, of course, the things that surprised me the most were in fields that I wasn't that I don't know that much about or I'm not that involved in. For example, the ridiculous claim. Here's something that should make you angry if you send your kids to Princeton. I added two classicists, and people say, "Why? It's about science." Well, I tend to think of science as coming from the classics as sort of the Greek tradition, and it was okay to include that broadly. But the classics department at Princeton decided to change the regulations so you could get a degree in classics at Princeton without ever taking Latin or Greek. Now,
Mm.
now this is absolutely ridiculous. It's also racist because the idea is that some groups, as yet to be labeled, cannot handle Latin or Greek, and they should not miss the opportunity to study classics. And therefore, we have to make you have to make a route that they can study this material without actually doing the intellectual rigor that's required. Well, that's inherently racist, that whole idea. It's just ridiculous. And the idea that the claim, in fact, the claim that classics is racist by some activist classicist is just so ludicrous. But it had to be responded to this way. So you're demeaning the education of kids at Princeton. That's a trivial one, but nevertheless shocking. But then the perversion of medicine, which look, I mean, I'm a physicist, and often, when I was on PhD committees for theoretical physicists, I'd say, well, okay, if this person gets a degree and they're not the best in the world, it's okay. They're not going to hang a shingle outside their window saying theoretical physicist. And but a doctor, we all hope our doctors are trained. And in
They better
Canada
be.
and the United States, medical education is being perverted, but also medical care. Um, it's shocking. For example, as I think Sally Satel um, talked about, I'm a psychiatrist, one of the people that in Boston during COVID, uh, there were priorities for people who were most at risk, and obviously the people who are most at risk are older people, right? But it was discovered that there are more older white people than black people who were there. So they said, well, we can't do that. So the priority was not on older people. It was on minorities and also that in medical studies, where you're doing research on diseases that are say, and there are diseases um, that that do affect different racial groups more than others, sickle cell anemia, other things like that. And
Yeah.
when doctors when you're doing research grants, suddenly they discovered what their sample group was the people who were affected, but then they were told no, you have to have a sample group that's not that's that's diverse just for political reasons. It gets in the way of the science. You're affecting healthcare
Yeah.
by restricting research in science. And then finally, in medical education, kids are told that well, in fact, the Canadian Medical Association in their CanMeds program for medical education for the next 5 years said that training students in social justice issues is more important than in medical expertise. And this is
Mm.
for, this is for doctor. People, when you go to your doctor, you want them to be sympathetic, but you also want them to know something. And those, those are some examples. And then, of course, there are the cases of the people who have been canceled. Now, I knew all these cases because I asked these people, but they're just disgusting. Carol Hooven at Harvard basically had to leave because she had the temerity to go on a TV program as an evolutionary biologist who studies sex differences, basically, that there are two sexes. And she basically got drummed out of her department at Harvard. Um, uh, Francis Widdowson, who was removed from a tenured position in Canada for asking questions, more or less, at faculty meetings about whether Indigenous astronomy was really an essential part of for what undergraduate students, introductory students in astronomy should learn. And
Right.
then other people who are drummed out by because false claims are made about them, but and they have no recourse. Um, and universities are just as happy to to um, to throw them under the bus rather than allow them, or have a free and open inquiry. And so, uh, and then faculty are afraid if a student makes any kind of claim, um, you can be, faculty can be, and it's true against students for something a faculty member said or a student says. Uh, and in fact, you have universities that were, while had sort of anonymous phone lines where you could phone in and basically report on people you heard saying things you didn't like. It is just like East Germany, I mean, or the Soviet
Totally.
Union. It's
But
terrible.
what you're describing here, Lawrence, is a fundamental shift. It's a paradigm shift, but away from the focus which always used to be, let's get a hold of the truth, regardless of where it leads to, and replacing that with no, ideology must come before the truth, before research, before honest inquiry, and that's what guides us from this point on.
It's a kind of secular religiosity. As you probably know, I've spoken out against organized religion in many what cases
Yeah.
because it assumes the answers before asking the questions. And it's exactly that case here. The answers are assumed. There's heresy. There are all the facets of religion except for um, uh, except for forgiveness. um, and and so
Yeah.
you cannot. There's some things you cannot say, and also it also is reminiscent of the 1950s with the in the United States, the Red Scare and
McCarthy.
the loyalty oaths, because faculty and postdocs and researchers essentially for years have been required to give loyalty oaths, worse than loyalty oaths, right? When they're applying for grants to show how their work is intimately and actively related to anti-racism. Now you're asking a string theorist who works in 11 dimensions on abstract mathematical concepts to explain how their work isn't how all of everything they do every day is aimed at fighting racism. It's nonsense. And if you don't do that, if you write a research statement that simply says I treat everyone equally, independent of the color of their skin or their gender, I'm in favor of open inquiry, and that you won't pass muster. As I talk about in the introduction, at University of Berkeley, California, um, where they have these diversity, equity, inclusion bureaucracies, as they do in all universities, they looked at these diversity, equity, and inclusion statements before the research statements. And for an application for a professor in biology, 76% of the candidates were removed from the pool on the basis of their diversity statements before you could read their research statements.
They never even looked at their research.
No, no. So, if Albert Einstein had not written a good enough diversity statement, well, as it was, he didn't get an academia back. Yes, you get it.
What is the number one threat to real science today? I mean, you've mentioned a few things. Is it climate? Is it trans ideology? Is it woke administrations in universities? Is it something else? Do you identify the number one threat? Is it Trump? What is the number one threat to science today?
And by the way, China and Singapore and they're not busy having debates about
No.
whether there are two
No.
sexes. They're building great science, And
And they're
so
laughing at us, I should think, while they're doing it.
I think it's a takeover of scientific hierarchy by groups that cater to this nonsense and that therefore affect grant funding, um, what is allowed to be discussed at scientific meetings. And scientists are interested in ideas, but they also need to be funded, and therefore they have to go with the flow. And I think the fact that they that I think the fact that faculty are afraid to ask questions. I mean, that's the bottom line, because science is all about, as you pointed out, asking questions. I wouldn't say it's a search for truth. Of course, it is a search for truth, but it is the fact that nothing is sacred. Nothing is sacred, and that we should all recognize nothing is beyond questioning. And when researchers are afraid to ask certain questions or afraid to carry out work or hire the best people, which is the other thing. I mean, hiring on merit is out the window in much of the West academia. You have to bean count the number of heads of certain colors rather than who's the best, or genders. Um, and when you can't hire the best people and you can't ask the best questions, then it undermines the infrastructure of science, and that may not be apparent right away, but it's going to be apparent 25 years down the road, because the health and economic well-being of the West is dependent upon a vibrant scientific infrastructure. And when that infrastructure goes away, well, it's already happening. China is quickly becoming the, the leader in science, and I suspect the 21st century will be the Chinese century, as the 20th century was the American century.
What's happening in scientific publishing? Because even I've noticed that journals like Nature, probably the most important and highly reputational journal in the world, and also popular journals like Scientific American, they seem to have changed over the last few years.
Yeah, Scientific American is a lost cause. It became their editor was a ridiculous social activist, and they stopped being a. I used to be on the board of Scientific American. I used to write
Yeah.
for them, but I think they're not. I don't think they're a science journal in any way anymore. But Nature and it's not just Nature. It's the Royal Society of Chemistry, Journal of Chemistry. They're the gatekeepers. And Nature Behavior, a very distinguished journal, said we will not publish articles, even if the science is correct, if it might offend people. And Royal Society, I mean, they basically said if it might, quote unquote, cause harm to marginalized groups, even if it's correct. And Royal Society of Chemistry sent out a letter to their editor saying, when you're editing, if anything can offend anybody, regardless of the intent, it's not the intent of the speaker, it's the intent of the reader. If there is any reader anywhere who might be offended, don't publish it.
But
And
this is the
I
fundamental.
talk at the end of my introduction to the book, I talk about an example from 300 years ago from Anton von Leeuwenhoek, who was the inventor of the microscope, or at least used the microscope, not necessarily invented, but used it to discover so much. He submitted something to the Royal Society, discovered spermatozoa, and he submitted his article, and then he wrote to the president of the Royal Society and said, if you think this is inappropriate or offensive, please don't publish it. And of course, they published it. So I like to say we want to go back to the good old days of 1710 or whatever it was.
But I think the fundamental error here is if you don't publish the truth, then you automatically engender harm somewhere along the line, a bigger
Of
harm
course,
in the long
it comes
run.
back to bite you. Of course, if there are things that are important in health, and you're afraid to do it, people are going to die. Um,
Yeah.
ultimately, it's that's what science is all about. You follow the evidence, and that's why we progressed in 3, 4, 500 years, because we let
So,
nature determine what's true, or at least what the appropriate set of action should be. And
so I
yeah,
was going
it's
to say,
terrifying.
is this conflict then really, when you get down to the very bottom of the conflict, is the conflict really about who gets to define what truth is in society? Is it scientists? Is it politicians? Is it activists? Is it the public?
Well, it should never
And
be any person. It should never be any individual. It should be nature.
but is that what the nature of the real problem is here? Who is defining the truth? And a squabble or a war against who
That's
wants to define it?
It's always been that case, and that's the problem that has been the case with religion, and now it's the case elsewhere. The truth is, you are not, we claim our truth is that there are not two sexes, and you cannot violate that claim, in spite of the fact that there are two sexes. Um, and uh, I don't think, as a scientist, I don't think in terms of truth so much, because in science we never have the absolute truth. We just, as Sherlock Holmes would say, when you get rid of all the stuff that isn't true, you get closer to the truth. And um, and so what defines what you would call truth is experiment and observation and debate and discussion, all of that. And science is a social activity. People don't realize it. It's a dialectic. When you publish something, you expect it to be attacked, and attacked for good reasons, because only the good ideas survive.
Yeah.
And that's the way it works. And so, free and open inquiry, debate, discussion, and ultimately let reason and empiricism determine the proper course of action in science and in society, in my opinion. And when we give that up, we do it at our own peril, both as for science and I think broadly for democracy as well.
Public trust in science and in scientists in particular has fallen
Yes.
dramatically over the last few years. And is this the result of the way in which the direction's been taken by journals? I mean, Alan Sokal pointed this out very powerfully in the way in which he got published fake articles, which he made up in about the what's it hermeneutics of general relativity or something of that nature, which was
But
an
his
entirely
fake
made up
article,
article to see if they would publish something which was absolute nonsense. And lo and behold, they did.
when the public sees nonsense, and the public can see it, when there's ridiculous statements made by academics about sex or gender or whatever, a lot of the public can see through it. They begin to become suspicious when they see academics as activists on the extreme political left, when they see scientists like Scientific American, when they endorsed a candidate for president for the first time ever, you automatically lose credibility, because not everyone votes for that candidate. Science should be independent of politics. And when they see that, they think that science has become political. And and when they see the squabbles that are going on, and and then unfortunately, when they see restrictions on free inquiry, COVID was a great opportunity to teach people about science, and it was a botched opportunity, because science at the forefront is always provisional, and it makes progress in baby steps. People don't realize that. And we didn't know anything about COVID. It's a miracle that we learned as much as we did, as fast as we did. And it would have been a wonderful way to show that. But instead, people's claims were made, you cannot say this or do this, in spite of the fact of not knowing about everything from the origins of COVID to the efficacy of certain treatments.
What did you make of Anthony Fauci, who made the claim that you can't criticize me because to criticize me is to criticize the science? I am the science.
Yeah, it was ridiculous, and he's part of the problem. The way he handled and treated it, and the way he bent himself to an look. He'd been an administrator for 50 years, and that means he knows how to please his bosses. And he did a very effective job of pleasing his bosses and sounding reasonable. I think he was a huge part of the problem. Yeah. I'm, I used to like him in a way in the early days, especially with HIV related stuff and things, but
Yeah.
but his treatment was horrendous. The way he and and also another guy I know well, friend Francis Collins, handled the treatment of disparate ideas, and Francis Collins was the head of the National Institutes of Health, the largest scientific funding agency in the world, probably.
Mm.
And not only did he do
It's
that, but then ridiculously after George Floyd, Francis Collins said, "Oh, biomedical research is systemically racist," which is just these people virtue signaling.
yeah.
And and it's obviously nonsense. It's obviously something he doesn't believe, because if he really believed it, he'd been head of the NIH for 10 or 15 years. If he really believed the infrastructure of biomedical sciences was racist, the infrastructure that he led for 15 years, he should have resigned. It was just nonsense. It was just virtue signaling hypocrisy. And that's the
You, you,
problem.
you've taken this battle to social media now, and you've been very effective at creating your own social media platform, really. The Origins podcast. Is social media the best way to tackle these problems in science at the moment?
Look, it's one way. It's one way. There's a lot of social media mobs, but I don't think, I think look, people are, unfortunately, you have to do it in more than 200 letters. A tweet is, whatever, 200 characters. And
Yeah,
and
but
and
I
that's why
mean,
you need to do it in books. You have to do we have to try in every way we can. But we can't forget social media where a lot of this stuff is promulgated. And I think we have to speak out in social media. But I think we have to write, speak, we have to do it, it's 1,000 points of light. So I think the bottom line is, and not only that, we have to create evangelists for science. Every human should be an evangelist for science, because it's an important part of our of keeping us healthy and well, and even of democracy,
mm,
promoting democracy. And so, yeah, social media is a place, I have been fortunate to have a fairly large social media following because of my past work and my writing and my TV and things. Um, but
I mean, you've got a very, very successful podcast with the Origins podcast. I'm quite envious of it, I have to say.
Well,
Um,
but this isn't the only issue. The point of the Origins podcast is to celebrate science and culture, and of course to fight attacks on science and culture. But we celebrate it by also exploring the neatest ideas and the people developing those ideas. So, I think yes, this Origins podcast did devote a series of podcasts to the war on science because it's important. But I'm just as happy when I speak to a cutting edge scientist about the wonders of the universe.
yeah. But I mean, you talk to everyone on your
Yeah.
podcast. You've
Well,
got
because science
Stephen
is such.
Fry, Ricky Gervais.
Ricky Gervais,
How,
Steve Rod, Woody Allen, everyone from,
yeah.
yeah.
How
Um,
do you get those people onto your podcast? I mean,
well,
is
because
there a secret?
there's no secret. I'm just fortunate in having a good Rolodex. I happen to have, because of my work and it's because of my writing and to some extent my appearance in movies and TV, that I happen to, for some reason, have a broad set of friends and acquaintances, and who are agreed to be on the, even when their lawyers sometimes told them not to. So I'm very fortunate, and yeah, I'm lucky. So
Okay, but
that's one of the reasons I did it, by the way, because I have such a broad set of connections. I thought it would be a good way to show people that science is part of our culture, and to talk to people. People won't go on wouldn't come necessarily listen to me, but they'll come listen to Ricky Gervais, and then they'll hear that he's incredibly thoughtful and interested in science, and I think that's great when people see their role models, not scientific nerds, but regular people. That's why when we made a movie, there was a movie made about Richard Dawkins and I a decade ago called The Unbelievers, which I was a producer of as well as being in. We got people like Woody Allen, who's on the podcast. We got people like Cameron Diaz and other people, and Cormac McCarthy, and I was happy to get Cormac McCarthy on the podcast. People who are literary or artistic icons, or I told Cameron that there are lots of young girls who idolize her, and if they discover she's interested in science, she's doing a great service to humanity. And so she was kind enough to be on to do that. And
Who's your favorite podcast interviewee? Who stands out in your memory?
well, look, everyone also asks me for my favorite this or that, and I don't think that way. I don't think hierarchically. I just like
Well, who stands out
there
then?
are
Let's
lots
not
of good
let
ones. I
put
mean, Stephen Fry. I'd listen to Stephen Fry read the phone book, um, and, and he's lovely, and we've done a bunch of podcasts. He's wonderful, and Ricky was great. Noam Chomsky is always thoughtful, and my frankly. My dialogue with Woody Allen was wonderful because I don't think there's been anyone like it, where we talked about his whole life and ideas, and for 2 hours, um, and then and there are of course the scientific ones are fascinating and thoughtful. Obviously, in England, my good friend Lord Martin Rees, who is the president of the Royal Society
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and master at Trinity College and Astronomer Royal. He's
yeah.
obviously been thoughtful, and we've done a bunch of podcasts and in which we disagree, which I think is great. And there's Robert Sapolsky, who I really enjoy, and on free will. Now, anyway, I enjoy them all.
He keeps
So
saying no to me, Robert Sapolsky.
well, he's a friend. So what can I say?
Well, okay, you. Is social media though really part of the problem here because it's run by algorithms, which often feed you information that you want to hear and doesn't feed you information which you don't want to hear, and that ends up polarizing society in a very, very powerful way.
Of course, yeah. No, social media is a huge part of the problem, and people get large followings, and people are afraid because if they get attacked on social media, that it can destroy their reputation, and it can. And so you have these activists who spend their whole time trying to impact public perception, who have an undue power. Social media was great. The fact that you could open up everything, that there was sort of a democracy of ideas seemed good, except there isn't. People get echo chambers. The solution is always education. Open kids' minds, get them critical thinking. And if we can get kids to think critically and look for evidence and question things, then it doesn't matter what they see or hear. And I think we want it. That's the key is to have an educational system that trains people for the 21st century, not the 20th or 19th century, not that gives them a bunch of facts, but rather trains them to think critically, to ask questions, and to learn how to answer those questions by seeking diverse and multiple sources and being skeptical of what they read.
Should
That's the kind
any
of education that
should
we
any
need. I don't
question
think we have it.
should any questions be off the table?
No,
No questions.
not in my opinion. I'm a free speech
Okay.
absolutist.
I
And
mean,
I,
there are
and
some people who've done research on, I don't know, racial characteristics and intelligence and there's
I,
eugenics and all that kind of thing.
and the answers will be important to learn. And there are racial differences in certainly in biological. I mean, as I say, there are certain groups that are more susceptible to certain diseases. That already tells you something. But there
Yeah.
may be, but it's been well shown. I mean, we know the things that people are worried about when it comes to intelligence, to the extent that we can even define intelligence. That there, there's no that there are there's more differences within racial groups and between racial groups. And
So
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 so I think
if you go on.
so the point is there's no questions that should not be asked. I think
So you're a research absolutist, but would you also say you're a free speech absolutist as well?
absolutely. I think someone could be a racist, and the way you counter that is by debating them and arguing them and showing them they're ridiculous, just as I've done for religious fundamentalists. I'm not. This goes back to I think Hume or even someone else. I learned it first from my friend Christopher Hitchens. Um, the purpose of free speech is not to give freedom to the people who are speaking. The purpose of free speech is to give you the opportunity to learn that you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so I am a free speech absolutist. I think there's almost. I mean, the only limits are inciting violence. I think
Yeah.
ultimately, and even that is tenuous because people could say someone says something and that incites violence, but But um, I think ultimately, when it comes to universities, anything should go.
Yeah.
And and a professor can be racist or sexist. But that doesn't mean, look, that but, he can say those things, but the student should not only be free to counter it, what it doesn't mean is that he treats, when it comes to the students, differently. They can espouse viewpoints, but if you show that they are actually acting,
Yeah.
carrying out racist policies, then that's not allowed. But
Well,
speaking
that's
of,
something
what was that?
there were not many people who are free speech absolutists. I know that Elon Musk claims to be. I'm also one, and
I
you're the
don't
third
believe
one.
Elon. I know Elon Musk, and I don't believe he is a free speech absolutist.
Oh, that's
He's
interesting because he claimed to be.
he's definitely in favor of his own free speech. There's no doubt about that.
But isn't that why he took over Twitter? Because he was in a free speech absolutist.
Yeah, well, yeah, but look what happens. Certain things are promoted. There's algorithms that it's still this. There are algorithms that effectively quash or promote certain ideas at the expense of others. So I
Is there anyone you don't know, Lawrence?
no.
You're the most well-connected person I've ever come across, I think. Gosh,
Well, I seem
I
to
just
be.
mentioned a name and you say, yes, I know him. That's good.
Yeah, I know it's kind of weird, isn't it? And
Uh, we're, we're
I've
coming
lost.
to the end of our t time together. I've just got a couple of questions to ask. One looking back and one looking forward. So if I ask you about looking back, first of all, looking back over your own long
Mhm.
career and all the things that you've done and been involved in, what are you most proud of?
Again, you asked me for most. I don't. I like.
Well,
People
give
ask
me
me
a couple of things then.
hey, people ask me what my favorite book is. I got all my books back there, all 13 of them hanging. And it's usually the one I just wrote. But I mean, scientifically, I think it's. I'm very proud of a number of things I've done, but I think the one that was most satisfying for me was to be essentially one of the first people to understand how nature worked in a certain way, namely arguing heretically that the dominant energy in the universe resided in empty space at a time when very few people viewed that as likely, and it turned out to be true, and it won the Nobel Prize. So I think that was very satisfying, and it was satisfying to be right, independent of prizes or anything else.
Does this connect to Jim Peebles' work on the background
Well,
radiation?
Jim Peebles was one of the people who, well, actually, I know Jim, and I've known him for a long time, but and we even
I
and
got to
well,
interview
we
him,
actually, in
which is why I
1984, we
mentioned
actually
him.
both, in an early stage, we actually wrote papers that are on a similar subject, but the saying that there might be a cosmological constant in nature, but then in 1995 is the work that I really did. But I mean, Jim Peebles is a giant in cosmology, so he's been involved in every area of it. He didn't push the idea of dark energy so much at the time, when we did, but early on in the 80s we both heretically argued that it might be one solution to a number of cosmological problems.
Anyway, so what about looking to the future then? Over the next, I don't know, 5 years, say, if the war on science continues the way it's going, and as you've been describing in your book, what does the world look like?
Well, look, I always tell people I don't predict the future unless it's 10 trillion years in the future. Um, because A, it's easy to do that, and B, no one will be around to check my predictions. So, I have a hard time predicting the future 2 weeks in the future. If we don't do something, then it's clear that the West, that science and progress and technology in the West will be will be slowed and eventually overtaken, I think, by by science and technology in countries where those social justice issues are not dominant, but instead people are just trying to do science. China is a good example. I think we'll find out that infrastructures that have been essential, laboratories and groups that have been essential for ensuring the scientific health of the nation will will be dismantled or severely handicapped. We'll find out that activists will become scientific leaders and leaders of institutions, and that this effort to quash free thinking will continue. I do think there's a reaction. I like to think where we maybe have passed the peak, but it's certainly nowhere near, not far past the peak. But, there was, I won't even mention a media group that I used to like that was going to do two podcasts and feature two of excerpts from two of our pieces, and then said, "Oh, the war's over, so we're not going to do it now." And I mean that's just totally wrong. So we always risk social and economic and health and knowledge progress by restricting inquiry. And if we continue to do that, opportunities will be lost, and the quality of life and the need to address the challenges of the 21st century will be hindered. And who knows
What
what will
what
happen as a result.
what's the biggest problem? Is it ignorance or is it certainty?
Ignorance is not pejorative. I mean, there's ways to counter ignorance. So ignorance is just, that ignorance is an opportunity. Certainty is a problem.
Certainty is a problem. Lawrence, thank you ever so much for your time today and for talking to me. It's been
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you. Okay. It was
No, I
enjoyable.
also thank you personally that, you know so many important and significant people that I feel particularly thankful that you're willing to give an hour of your time to talk to someone who is completely unknown to you. And I thank you for that. That's a kindness. Thank you.
Oh, your persistence was enjoyable. Okay. Good.
Well,
Well,
actually, I really was taken up by this book, The War on Science, and I've contacted many of the people in it, and I've spoken to half a dozen at least of them already. And I thought, well, I better try and get the guy who actually put it all together, So,
well, I'm glad you did, and thank you for helping. I don't want to say promote it, but these ideas are
well, it's not
important.
just promoting the book. I'm very much committed to the same cause that,
Yeah,
and I have the
I
same kind of ideals and the same kind of hope for free speech and research being absolute and nothing off the table. So thanks,
no, I
thanks for
appreciate
that.
it. We all have to be active soldiers in the war on science. So in the war for science. So
No.
I'm happy to have a comrade in arms here, and it was
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Lawrence, and thank you for
Okay,
your time once again. Take care.
take care. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye.